A very good morning to all of you. I welcome you all to Ansarkari and I hope that you all must be doing great. So let's start with today's analysis, which is going to be for 13th of March 2023. So we've been talking about the Silicon Valley Bank's failure, and in yesterday's newspaper, we saw what were the reasons that led to the failure of this bank. So the failure of this bank, this contagion, it may leave India unscathed. Basically, no impact on Indian startups. So this is coming from the finance ministry officials. So the failure of the US-based Silicon Valley Bank may only hit some Indian tech startups and IT firms for now, while any broader contagion effects that may arise will neither reach Indian shores in a hurry nor are they likely to trigger systematic risks, according to the top finance ministry officials. However, the center is cognizant of the fact that the key underlying trigger for the bank's woes, rapidly rising the US interest rates that have rendered past government bond holdings underwater or loss making securities, is the main reason. So it could impinge on the operational health of other financial institutions as well. So the main reason, or as we talked about, what was the cause behind the bank's failure was the tight monetary policy, the increase in interest rates, because of which investors, they were not, basically now they were not fond of investing in startups. So that's where the startups were facing problem in fundraising, and obviously private fundraising became much more expensive because now the cost of borrowing increased because of increase in the interest rate. So that's when the startups they started withdrawing money from the Silicon Valley Bank, and the bank faced the pressure of it because obviously banks do not hold 100% of the bank deposits with them. So that was the main reason in short. And if these troubles spread, the resultant flight to safety among the global investors could hit the capital flows into emerging markets such as India and impact the rupee as well. So this is right now, this is not the case. And same-sex union, they can rock societal values as per center. So any change in the human relationship should come from legislature and not the court. Center says in it affidavit in the response to a Supreme Court decision to examine the petitions on the same-sex marriage. So here we can talk about judicial overreach instances. You should be knowing about few cases of judicial overreach. Apart from that, when we're talking about law, so it is obviously the responsibility, the obligation of the legislator to come up on any law regarding the same-sex union or homosexuals, and not the Supreme Court. So the institution of marriage has a sanctity attached to it, and in major parts of the country, it is regarded as a sacrament, a holy union, and a sanskar. So in our country, despite the statutory recognition, the relationship of marriage between a biological man and a biological woman, marriage necessarily depends upon age-old customs, rituals, practices, cultural ethos, and the societal values. This is the Union government's affidavit that was submitted to the Supreme Court. And apart from that, the center in an affidavit in the Supreme Court has frowned upon the same-sex marriage while invoking the accepted view that a marriage between a biological man and woman is a holy union, a sacrament, and a sanskar in India. And this affidavit was in response to the court's decision to examine the petitions to allow solemnization of the same-sex marriage under the Special Marriage Act of 1954, which provides a civil form of marriage for the couples who cannot marry under their personal law. So we've discussed this before as well. And apart from that, Parliament has designed and framed the marriage laws in the country, which are governed by the personal laws and codified laws relatable to the customs of various religious communities to recognize only the union of a man and a woman to be capable of legal sanctions. So the homosexual marriages are not legal in India as of now, and thereby they can claim the legal and the statutory rights and the consequences. So any interference with the same would cause a complete havoc with the delicate balance of the personal laws in the country and in the accepted societal values. This is what the government believes, and it said, And the government said the court had only decriminalized this sexual intercourse between the same-sex person in its 2018 judgment, which was the Navteej Singh Johar judgment, and not legalized this conduct. So there's a difference between it that the court, it only decriminalized the sexual intercourse between the same-sex persons, and it did not legalized this conduct. And soon, net zero waste is going to be a must for buildings, and ensuring net zero waste and treating the liquid discharge, it will soon be made mandatory for the new housing societies and commercial complexes in the country as part of the Union Housing and Urban Affairs Ministry's push for the reforming and modernizing the sewage disposal system. So net zero waste, and then also treating the liquid discharge. And you can see the rite of colors. So revelers, they play with colors during a traditional procession, which is called Gair, which is an occasion of Rang Panchami in Indore, Madhya Pradesh. And the district administration has sought the Gair's inclusion in the UNESCO representative list of intangible cultural heritage of humanity as well. So one of the most concerning issue between Sri Lanka and India, and specifically talking about the state of Tamil Nadu, has always been the arrest of fishermen. So this has been repeated. So Sri Lanka Navy, it arrest 16 fishermen from Tamil Nadu, and they've been arrested by Sri Lanka Navy on the charge of trespassing while fishing in the early hours of Sunday. So this is very often it happens this way. Coming to editorial page, let's see what is important here. So Ukraine and the war in Europe is hardly a laboratory for similar experiments as elsewhere. And talking about its impact on Europe, so several other reasons can also be adduced for Europe's current mindset. First, notwithstanding the generous supply of state-of-the-art weapons from the United States, Europe is painfully aware that it remains entirely at the mercy of the NATO and the US today. And Europe's defense industry continues to remain extremely fragile, and prospects that this would change appear remote, thus perpetuating Europe's dependence on the US and NATO. Second is in the realm of the economics, Europe is hurting, and the prospect of a prolonged stalemate and a war without end appears highly daunting. So obviously there are certain economic challenges also because of this war, because the supply of natural gas, which used to happen from the Nord Stream gas pipeline, that has been disrupted. So that is one of the economic impacts. And obviously then supply of wheat, food grains, all of that has been impacted because of this war. And we are seeing high inflation. So European leaders, including Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz, they are now engaging in quiet diplomacy to end this war without making it appear that Europe has had to make major compromises. Then moving forward, so USA has been providing the high mobility artillery mobility rocket systems to Ukraine, and they've been providing Javelin and the launchers such as HIMARS. So obviously this has given additional confidence to all comers. So China's strong stance. For its part, China is preparing for all eventualities right now, and the language being used by China today is among the harshest and most direct in recent times, and alleging that the US is engaged in the suppression and the containment of China. It has warned that if the US does not hit the brakes and continue to speed down the wrong path, no amount of guardrails and that can prevent the derailment or leading to the conflict and confrontation. So Chinese President Xi Jinping, for his part, has directly accused the US and the Western countries of all-round containment, encirclement, and suppression of China. And many of these statements were made on the sidelines of the National People's Congress held earlier this month. Apart from that, China has been openly accusing US of attempting to encircle China through its Indo-Pacific strategy, which according to him was an Asia-Pacific version of NATO and whose real purpose was to encircle China. While Taiwan, it may remain the flashpoint in the Indo-Pacific, further aggravated by the repeated visits in recent weeks of the top US military leaders to Taiwan, newer tensions are adding fresh grist to possibilities of a conflict in other regions in the Indo-Pacific, and US claims in the wake of the Ukraine conflict of defeating all the comers could instigate more tensions that lead on to a conflict, which comes perilously close to an open confrontation culminating into a war. So obviously, we know that the situation in Taiwan is intense and it is like tense. Then danger of provoking a world war. So all wars start with a misreading or misunderstanding of the intentions of the other side. And the US's success is in assisting Ukraine to withstand the Russian offensive and incidentally undermining Russia's image of being a kind of superpower in Europe. That appears to be encouraging the US and certain other Western powers to redefine the global power equation and seek a return to the post 1945 period in world affairs. And after Europe, the target appears to be China. So, China and Taiwan could be the next reason for the standoff or for the next war in Indo-Pacific. So it would, however, be a gross misreading of the situation if the US were to attempt the containment of China at this time, flush with its success in Europe and provoking retaliation elsewhere, thus paving the way for a new world conflict. And it could turn out to be a tragedy of gigantic proportions. So obviously, it can lead to a third world war if situation gets worse and things move as we just talked about in this article. So we've been talking about the safe harbor principle. So you need to be like, I hope now you are aware about what do we actually mean by it. So it is mentioned in the IT Act of 2000. So regulation of the net intermediaries, they must not involve unreasonable requirements. So we're talking about the internet intermediaries, the social media platforms. So informally outlining the crux of the proposed Digital India Act of 2023, the Minister of State IT made a case for a robust replacement of the IT Act 2000, which is somewhat obsolete now. And she ominously added a question that the government sought to revisit. Should there be a safe harbor at all for all the intermediaries or not? So this is being assessed, and this requires significance that the government has been working towards increasing the compliance burden on internet intermediaries, in particular in the IT rules 2021 also, and its later amendments. So these rules themselves, they had put the onus on the social media intermediaries to arbitrate on content on their platforms with regulations that were weighted in favor of the government of the day and had invited the legal appeals as digital news media platforms, among others. They questioned the constitutionality of the rules. So regulation of hate speech and disinformation on the internet is a must, and intermediaries, including digital news media and social media platforms, they have an accountable role to play. And in this context, we can talk about with the latest incidents that we've just seen because of the fake news that spread on social media was the issue of migrants in the state of Tamil Nadu. So that was obviously responsible because of the spreading of the fake videos. And that's where obviously now social media intermediaries, they have to play an accountable role in order to ensure that the whatever content is being posted on their platform has to be regulated, and no disinformation and no rumors must spread. So while modern regulations to tackle the issues related to misinformation, problematic content, and the side effects of the new form of internet are a must, they should still retain first principles of safe harbor without whittling down their core. That's there. So more than 4 years ago, the Supreme Court of India decriminalized adultery in its landmark judgment of Joseph Shine versus Union of India in 2018. It held Section 497 of the IPC along with Section 198 of the Criminal Procedure Code to be unconstitutional on the premise that these provisions were violative of Article 14, 15, and 21 of the Constitution of India. So adultery was decriminalized under this Joseph Shine versus Union of India judgment of 2018. Which further we can say that aggrieved by the order concerning its implementation, the armed forces, the Union of India sought clarification from the court saying that any promiscuous or adulterous acts, they should be allowed to be governed by the relevant sections of the Army Act, the Air Force Act, and the Navy Act, being special legislations by the virtue of Article 33 of the Constitution. So under Article 33, we see that Parliament has the powers to restrict or abrogate the fundamental rights of certain categories of persons, including members of the armed forces, to ensure the proper discharge of their duties and maintenance of discipline among them. So that's what is there, that whenever like we're talking about adultery in the armed forces, so it should be governed by these three respective acts. So the point made is about establishing that an adulterous act has some nexus with the conduct of the person's professional duties also. So that can be one of the ways or one of the reasons also why adultery could be carried out. Apart from that, talking about the other Supreme Court judgments, so consequent to the Joseph Shine case, the Rajasthan's High Court in Mahesh Chand Sharma versus State of Rajasthan in 2019 set aside the departmental proceedings against the petitioner, who was serving as an inspector in Rajasthan Police after having served for 18 years in the Indian Air Force and allegedly had illicit relations with one woman constable and had also begotten a child from illicit relations. So the High Court held that no employer can be allowed to do moral policing on its employees which go beyond the domain of his public life, and personal choices and selections cannot be a subject matter of departmental proceedings under the service conduct rules. So this is what the High Court of Rajasthan held. And then more recently in the Mahesh Bhai Burji Bhai Damor versus the state of Gujarat in 2022, the Gujarat High Court quashed and set aside the dismissal order of an armed police constable arising from allegations that he had developed illicit relations with a widow, which amounted to misconduct. So the departmental inquiry revealed that the relations between the two, they were voluntary and mutual, and there was no exploitation of the woman. Court held that in order to prove the misconduct, allegations must have some nexus, direct or indirect, with the duties to be performed by the government servant. So that they must be in relation to the duties being incorrectly performed or something like that, and not with the personal relationship or the personal life of the concerned person. So as alleged, the act was a private affair and not a result of any coercive pressure. So the act of the petitioner at the most could be considered as an immoral act. However, to term it as a misconduct as per the conduct rules would be too far-fetched. So that needs to be very clear. So there's a caveat also that cannot be overlooked. So though Article 33 of the Constitution, it empowers the Parliament to restrict the fundamental rights of the members of the armed forces, the caveat of so as to ensure the proper discharge of their duties and the maintenance of discipline among them cannot be overlooked. So there is a loophole in this. So the same principle will also apply to the members of the forces charged with the maintenance of the public order, that is the police personnel of all the states and union territories, intelligence and counterintelligence agencies, including their communication sections as provided in Article 33. So therefore, neither did the Joseph Shine verdict of 2018 inhibit the parameters of the departmental proceedings, nor has the clarification sought enlarged them. So it is true that many acts and omissions which are not necessarily criminal in nature may amount to acts unbecoming of a government servant. So common thread running through all the relevant judgments is that if the conduct interferes directly or indirectly with the honest discharge of the duties, such conduct may be considered as unbecoming of a government servant. So somewhere directly or indirectly, it has to be related to the conduct or misconduct, whatever we can say. So the legislative intent of Article 33 of the Constitution is also similar, and therefore the sacrosanct right to privacy available to the members of the armed forces and the policemen engaged in the maintenance of public order cannot be taken away under the guise of special legislations unless it has some nexus with their duties. So this is the most important point that we can take away from this article. So you need to have this distinction in your mind very clear, and statements can come up in prelims regarding this thing. And we also talked about what did the Article 33 is talking about regarding the same thing. So a survey debunks Swachh Bharat's 100% ODF claims. So over 21% of rural households do not have access to any type of toilet according to a government survey. And then we analyze it through and try to understand it through the maps. Map 1 is showing the percentage of rural households in which a majority of the members, they had access to some type of latrine. So that is there. And as per the colors, you can see dark blue is where it was 100% access is available. So it is there in Kerala, in Ladakh, and in Manipur and Mizoram as well. Apart from that, so the share of ODF plus villages as of 1st of April 2022. So it is like between, most of them are between 0 to 25%, and only Telangana and Tamil Nadu are there, which are more than 75%. So the rise of ESG regulations. ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance related regulations. So what are the environment, social, and governance regulations, and how do they differ from the corporate social responsibility rules? Why are the regulations important for the Indian economy? And will ESG compliance help the Indian companies play a more prominent role in the global supply chains? So firstly, understanding what is the difference between ESG and CSR. So India has a robust corporate social responsibility policy that mandates that corporations engage in initiatives that contribute to the welfare of the society. So this mandate was codified into law with the passage of the 2014 and 2021 amendments to the Companies Act of 2013. And the amendments, they require the companies with a net worth of rupees 500 crores or a minimum turnover of rupees 1000 crores or a net profit of rupees 5 crores in any given financial year spend at least 2% of the net profits over the preceding 3 years on the corporate social responsibility activities. So these are the conditions. So you need to remember all of these, and the list of qualifying CSR activities, it intentionally, it is broad and ranging from supporting the protection of the historically important sites to promoting safe drinking water can be a part of CSR. And talking about ESG regulations, on the other hand, it differ in the process and the impact that they have. So the UK Modern Slavery Act, for example, requires companies with a business in the UK and with annual sales of more than 36 million pound to publish the efforts they have taken to identify and analyze the risk of the human trafficking, child labor, and debt bondage in their supply chain, establish internal accountability procedures, evaluate supplier compliance, and to train supply chain managers regarding all these issues. So here, in case of CSR, the funds have to be allocated for such activities, whereas in case of ESG regulation, the impact and the process is quite different. So, why is ESG? It is relevant in India. So, India has long had a number of laws and bodies regarding the environmental, social, and the governance issues. For example, the Environment Protection Act of 1986, quasi-judicial organizations such as the National Green Tribunal we have, and a range of labor codes and the laws governing employee engagement and the corporate governance practices. So the penalty for these violations can be substantial. And while these laws and bodies they provide important environmental and social safeguards, new initiatives in India they go further, establishing guidelines that emphasize monitoring, quantification, and disclosure akin to the ESG requirements found in other parts of the world. And SEBI, responding to the increase in ESG investing and the demand by the investors for information on ESG risk, substantially revised the annual business responsibility and sustainability report, which is required by the 1,000 largest listed companies in India. So even in case of investors, they are considering the ESG factor in their investment decisions. So further legislation regarding ESG are likely, and given the increased emphasis by Indian government on ESG issues, which can be seen in India's more active role in global climate forums, as well as in specific policy developments such as announcement in Jan by the Reserve Bank of India that it would be auctioning rupees 80 billion in green bonds. So these are green bonds is the case for the environmental issue, and there are some social and governance related issues which are being taken into consideration, and they are being allotted much more importance now, and definitely they have an importance in case of India as well. So what are going to be the implications for the Indian companies? So compliance with the ESG regulations both originating in India and elsewhere around the world, thus they pose a significantly different challenge than India's CSR regulations. So obviously, companies will now have to oblige and they need to comply with the ESG regulations. So, talking about the challenges for these companies when we're talking about compliance with them. So, in particular, compliance by the Indian companies with the ESG regulations of US, UK, European Union, and elsewhere will be critical if India is to take full advantage of the growing decoupling from China and play a more prominent role in the global supply chains and the global marketplace overall. So as the Indian companies, they look to expand their ESG risk management. Thorough due diligence will play a key role. And however, this requires more than having sub-suppliers fill out a questionnaire. Due diligence that can stand up to scrutiny means going deeper. And depending on the situation, this can include looking at company records, interviewing the former employees, and making discreet visits to observe the operations to ensure that the measures to comply with the international ESG standards, they are in effect. So that's how the consequences of it are going to be different compared to the CSR. And companies that wish to maximize their opportunities in the global economy, they need to embrace these new requirements and adjust their organizations accordingly. So what is Rajasthan's right to health bill? So basically, the bill provides rights to the patients and the healthcare providers, places the obligation on the government to protect these legal rights and mandates the setting up of grievance redressal mechanism. And Rajasthan residents, they will be entitled to free checkups, drugs, diagnostics, emergency transport, and care at all the public health institutes, along with affordable surgeries. And doctors, they argue that the bill is both futile and an exercise in overregulation. So clinics and hospitals, they are required to abide by the state regulations and the norms. So scientists, they devise a glow scope to bring fluorescent microscopy to schools. So in this picture, it is basically showing a male hazelnut flower viewed under a fluorescence microscope. So that's how basically fluorescence can help in much more clear, identification of things. So researchers from the Winona State University, they say a rudimentary fluorescence microscope can cost around $30 to $50, and many individuals may not be able to afford this. So students in resource poor labs, they can use the fold scopes and glow scopes to study the microscopic world. So what actually is the fluorescence microscopy? So an optical microscope uses an object by studying how it observes, reflects, or scatters the visible light, and a fluorescence microscope uses an object by studying how it re-emits the light that it has absorbed. That is how it fluorescences, and that is its basic principle. So it re-emits the light that it has absorbed. So that's how it fluorescences, and the object is illuminated with a light of specific wavelength. So particles in the object absorb this light and remit it at a higher wavelength, that is in different colors, and these particles are called fluorophores. So the object is infused with them before being placed into the microscope. So that is there. So this is important, of course, from here. So India, Australia for early conclusion of Pact on Market Taxes, and so both the counterparts, they were pleased with the progress in negotiations, and CECA will create new jobs, raise the living standards as per the joint statement. So INS Sahayadri joins maritime exercise with the French Navy. So the Navy's guided missile frigate INS Sahayadri joined two frontline warships of France in carrying out a 2-day maritime partnership exercise in the Arabian Sea. And that's going to be there. So the name of the exercise is not named over here. Okay, and then G20 meet to focus on blue economy and responsible artificial intelligence. So responsible AI is a governance framework aimed at which data can be collected and used. So responsible application of artificial intelligence and blue economy will be the primary issues in focus during brainstorming sessions at 3-day Supreme Audit Institution's 20 engagement group delegates, and the Comptroller and Auditor General of India is the chair of it. So conserving the ocean assets, blue economy is the sustainable use of the ocean resources for the economic growth, improved livelihoods and jobs while preserving the health of our ecosystem. And responsible artificial intelligence is a governance framework aimed at which data can be collected and used, how artificial intelligence models they should be evaluated, and how to best deploy and monitor these models. So the framework can also be defined who is accountable for any negative outcomes of the AI. So purple revolution, you can see in this picture, this is there coming from the Jammu and Kashmir lavender field in Jammu and Kashmir, Bhaderwa district. So Adani Group repays around $2.15 billion loan before 31st March deadline and prepays Ambuja Cement's debt also. So it would be positive for the banks, because the banks who had exposure to them would be now having a sigh of relief. Moving forward, all members enjoy unhindered right to express their views in the Lok Sabha. So Speaker of Lok Sabha is saying this, and he was addressing the 14th Assembly of the Inter-Parliamentary Union. So he was speaking on the topic of promoting peaceful coexistence and inclusive societies, fight against intolerance. So in India, we have a robust participatory democracy and a vibrant multi-party system, where hopes and aspirations of the citizens find expression through the elected representatives, and all members enjoy the freedom to express their views and thoughts in the Lok Sabha. So we've talked about this development that now more buildings are set to achieve net zero waste in treating the liquid waste. So a center will bring in new norms for all upcoming housing and commercial complexes. So we'll be seeing those norms as well. So that is important. And achieving net zero waste means reducing, reusing, and recovering the waste streams, that is sludge, to convert them to valuable resources so that zero solid waste is sent to the landfills. So basically, how it can be reduced and reused and recycled and recovered so that we are reducing the solid waste. The guidelines include asking the urban local bodies such as municipalities to explore the potential of commercial use of processed sludges as fertilizers and impaneling all agencies providing sanitation services in both organized and unorganized sectors. And government would also be reviewing the Indian standards for mechanized cleaning equipments and consider differential tariff rates for the residential and the commercial desludging. So a Make in India startup for promoting the low-cost technological solutions such as mechanized spades and sensor sticks for gas detection is being considered. So towards SDGs, so experts believe a mechanized sewage system coupled with the mandatory zero net waste clause for housing and commercial complexes was important for achieving the SDGs. And SDG 6.3 aims at halving the proportion of untreated wastewater and substantially increase recycling and safe reuse globally by 2030. So single day rise of 524 COVID cases in India. So now we are again seeing a gradual increase in COVID-19 cases. So please follow the COVID appropriate behavior again, because again, the rising number of cases is a concern for us. And railways issue standard operating procedure for transporting arms and ammunition by rail and road. So that is going to ensure the safety of such sensitive consignments and their escort personnel. Coming to the world page, so talking about August, firstly, there are three members, Australia, UK, and US. So Sunak, Biden, and Albanese to meet in San Diego to finalize the AUKUS deal. So the partnership was announced in September 2021 as a part of the strategies of the US, UK, and Australia to engage more deeply with the Indo-Pacific. And then when we're talking about Indo-Pacific, so other important body is Quad. So that is important. So they are going to meet and they will provide nuclear powered submarines to Australia, UK, and US. So that is there. And a trilateral security partnership between Australia and these three members. So they will provide nuclear powered submarines to Australia. So we even had a look at this thing also a few days ago. And the whole issue is regarding the nuclear powered submarines. So partnership was announced in 2021 as part of these countries' strategies to engage more deeply with the Indo-Pacific, largely to counter Beijing's assertiveness in the region, including what Canberra has described as Beijing's economic coercion. So currently only 6 countries they have nuclear fueled submarines. That includes India, US, UK, France, Russia, and China. So Australia's, whose fleet consists of 6 diesel-powered Collins-class submarines, will be the seventh once the AUKUS fleet is deployed in Australia. So let's take up Mint now. So what happens to Indian startups after the Silicon Valley banks fall? So let's see. So the main clients of SVB Bank includes startups. So what happened to the Silicon Valley Bank? This I've already explained you in the very beginning of the video. That was the main reason why the bank failed. What led to the bank's downfall? This we have seen and understood in short. And thirdly, how are Indian startups viewing this bank's failure? So SBB, it is the largest retail banking failure since 2008 financial crisis. This is one thing. And as the initial hysteria ebbed, investors and startups, they say that although the bank's downfall will affect the Indian startups, the industry is far from a panic mode right now. And SBB was an important partner for the startup economy, not just in the US, but worldwide as well. So that is the thing that why we are talking about their impact on the Indian startup. So for startups, especially those who were raising funds from US investors, the SVB was a medium for the venture debt and for depositing their own funds. So investors and analysts said that for much companies that deposited their funds, the downfall could lead to cash flow problems, which in turn may lead to trouble in meeting the payrolls and other day-to-day expenses. And the larger concern is that many VCs they deposited millions in SVB, which could lead them to further slow down funding moves and delay the term sheets. So major issue is going to be related to the funding issues and meeting your day-to-day expenses. So which Indian startups did business with SVB? So according to data from research firm, so SVB, it has invested in about 21 Indian startups, including the likes of Shadi, Naptol, and 197 Communications, which runs Paytm. And in a LinkedIn post, entrepreneur Ganesh Krishnan, he explained that SVB sold its shares in these firms during further funding rounds or when the firms monetized, leaving them free of the so-called ripple effect. So investors said that the real risk is for the firms which had deposited their money in the banks, which include software startups with operations in the US. So we are not expecting any major impact on the Indian startups. Then how Indians move within the country. So we're talking about the migrants. So marriage is a far larger driver of migration in India than the jobs. And mostly that involves obviously women who move between villages within their own states due to exogamous traditions. And nearly half of the Indian women, they live in a place different from their own, while among men, the share is just 11%. So obviously that's true because we have a patrilineal society. And apart from that, the route from Uttar Pradesh to Maharashtra accounts for 5% of all the interstate job-related migrations. This is the largest migrant movement of all state pairings. And only 44% of the earning migrants, they see increased income after moving. So Kerala is among the most unattractive states if you're looking for an increase in income after migration. So talking about the definition of migrants, so the National Sample Survey defined the migrants as those who had ever spent at least 6 straight months in a village, town, or country different from their current place of residence, that is where they were surveyed. And survey took place in 2021. So this is the latest data. So states with the highest share of external migrants in terms of the population, and that is Delhi had the highest share of external migrants. That was at 21.3% of the Delhi's population includes migrants, followed by Himachal Pradesh, Punjab, Uttarakhand, Kerala, Jharkhand. So mostly you can see the highest share is that of the northern states. So states with the highest share of intra-state migrants in percentage in the population, that is Himachal Pradesh has the highest, followed by Telangana. This is intra-state migrants. So within the states we're talking about Tamil Nadu, then followed by Andhra Pradesh, Kerala, Maharashtra. So that is the case. And obviously most of them move because of marriage, followed by the studies, marriage, migration of parents or earning of the family, and there are some other reasons also. Coming to Financial Express, So global deliberations on 10 tracks would be including the inclusive of the global value chains for resilient global trade and investment, financing for the global economic recovery, financial inclusion, digital transformation, technology, innovation, and research and development, future of work, skilling, and mobility. Then we've talked about ESG today itself, and energy, climate change, and resource efficiency, then African economic integration. So these are going to be one of the most important topics of deliberations. We're talking about the CIA Powered Partnership Summit 2023. So, partnerships for responsible, accelerated, innovative, sustainable, and equitable businesses. You can see summit partners, Tata and TVS. So, platinum sponsors, diamond sponsors, so all of them are there. So Mauritius loses the edge on equity inflows. Here we're talking about the FDI inflows, FPI investments. So top FPI investments coming from USA. So USA accounts for the largest share when talking about FPI inflows into India. Apart from that, you have Singapore, Luxembourg, Mauritius, then followed by it is UK. So the share of Mauritius has declined. That's what we were talking about in the headlines. So that of USA has increased. You can see comparison between these two bar graphs. The height is increased for USA, it is decreased for Mauritius. Again, increase for Singapore, and almost the same we can say when talk about UK and Luxembourg. So assets dwindle 46% in just 1 year. So tighter regulatory oversight when we're talking about FPI. So Mauritius is fast losing its relevances as being the preferred destination for equity investments into India, given the greater regulatory oversight over the island nation and the perception of it being a tax haven also. So that's there. And investments from Mauritius, as gauged by the equity assets and custody, they have dipped 46%. And old investment made through Mauritius, which were grandfathered, they are getting sold. Buying into the Indian equities is happening through better and safer jurisdictions such as Singapore, Netherlands, because there is no treaty benefit for the equity investments from Mauritius. So in this context, we talk about GAR, which is the General Anti-Avoidance Rules. So structures set up in Mauritius, they can be tested by the tax authorities from a GAR perspective, where the fund will have to prove it has substance to claim treaty benefits. So that's there when talking about FPIs. So British finance minister says that let me be clear that during the financial crisis, there were investors and owners of systemic large banks that were bailed out, and we are not going to do that again. So this is, sorry, from the US Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, and British Finance Minister says that we will bring forward plans very soon to make sure people are able to meet their cash flow requirements to pay their staff. So this is all in the context of the impact of the failure of the SVB Bank in US. So our Union Minister for Electronics and IT says that the SVB closure is certainly disrupting the startups across the world, and I will meet with the Indian startups this week to understand the impact on them. So no rethink on the angel tax and rules next month. So Finance Ministry says that it will come out with the norms on the proposed angel tax next month to clarify how it will be levied and also provide valuation guidelines also. So however, there will be no rethink on the budget proposal to make it applicable to non-residents as well. So this is going to be there, and genuine startups registered with the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade will not be impacted. Valuation rules on how the investment will be calculated will also be issued, and objective is not to hurt the genuine businesses, but only ensure that those people who are trying to evade the taxes, they come under the tax net. So inflation is relatively lower as per the RBI MPC member, which is Monetary Policy Committee's member, Ashima Goyal. So government's supply side action coordinated with a flexible inflation targeting regime has kept the Indian inflation rates lower than other countries. So this is because of government's supply side action. So interstate agricultural trade on ENAM finally it gathers pace. So it is enabling farmers to access market information and access buyers beyond the local mandi areas. And that's how it is helping the farmers. And India to ensure no breach on Russia oil sanctions. So India will not breach the Western sanctions on Russia, including the price cap of $60 imposed on purchase of the oil from Moscow, according to the people familiar with the matter. So that's that India is not going to breach these sanctions that has been imposed by the Western world on Russia. So we have already talked about that cryptos would be now under the PMLA law in India. And we're very clear with what has been the RBI stand regarding this and what were the changes that were made before regarding the cryptocurrencies and what is India's stand on its regulation. So majorly we are saying that we need obviously global collaboration when we're talking about regulating the cryptocurrencies and how majorly basically what are the challenges also arising out of cryptos. So taking up the Indian Express, let's see what do we have for us today. So Russia crude in tank, India steps up petroleum product exports to European Union as region shuns Moscow. So understanding the graphs, first one, the top one is showing petroleum product exports to European Union. So you can see how sharply they are increasing from India. And the second one is talking about crude oil imports from Russia. So they've been gradually increasing. You can see the trend. There's an increase, then a slight dip, then a sharp increase, slight dip, and then an increase. So right now it is almost at the constant level, at the same level. So total it stands at 37.76 million tons. So, as the European Union weans itself of the refined petroleum products from Russia, Indian refiners, particularly the private sector companies, they are rushing in to fill this gap, making the region the top destination for India's refined product exports. So, this is basically and is leveraging this opportunity, and this comes as the Indian refiners they snap up the discounted Russian crude oil shunned by the European Union and other Western powers, with analysts pointing to a clear possibility of products refined from Russian barrels reaching the European Union's markets via India. So now obviously we know that sanctions has been imposed on Russia, so the countries they are not importing the crude or the natural gas from Russia, but now the trade is, we can say, it is happening indirectly to Europe from Russia to Europe via India. So that's how basically you can see that even our exports of the refined products have so they've been just increasing at a very sharper rate to Europe. So that's how it is basically being redirected to Europe. And in the run up to the European Union's ban on the Russian petroleum products, owing to the Ukraine invasion, India saw its refined product exports to the region rise for 5 straight months. So SEO countries should collectively strive to make judiciary more accessible, says our Chief Justice of India. So Chief Justice of India D.Y. Chandrachud has called on the Shanghai Cooperation Organization member states to strive for judicial cooperation in order to make the judicial system more approachable for the common people. And there's the need to collectively adopt new mechanisms to make court processes accessible, and he highlighted several challenges facing the judicial systems in the SCO member states and how the conference allowed all the member and the observer states to reflect upon the challenges that are common to their jurisdictions. So he emphasized that these issues they need to be tackled with mutual cooperation and by sharing experiences and wisdom gathered. So Islamic Republic of Iran and Republics of Belarus, they have the observer status. And when we talk about SEO, so they also have the regional anti-terrorism structure, which is called as RATS. And the SEO Secretariat were present at the two-day event also. So Pakistan had joined the event through video conferencing. Apart from this, you need to be aware about all the members of SEO. So quiet diplomacy is far more effective than public posturing, coming from Atal Bihari Vajpayee, sir. So quiet diplomacy is far more effective, and Canberra calling synergies between India and Australia are now being translated into concrete outcomes in the political, economic, and security domain. So we've been talking about the India-Australia relationship and what are some new initiatives, what are some new trade pacts that we are talking about that we're negotiating over. So this is very important topic for us now, and mm, so in politics and bureaucracy, women are severely underrepresented. So India is one of the fastest growing economies in the world, and for this year alone, IMF has forecasted 6.8% growth for the Indian economy in comparison to 1.6% for the US. So we're predicted to be the third largest economy in the world by 2030. India is expected to be behind only the US and China. So despite its economic growth, women's participation in the country's economy, polity, and society has not kept pace. So elections in India, they have witnessed a striking contrast in the recent times. So the female voter turnout has increased in the country. 7 out of 8 states that went to polls in 2022, they saw a jump in the female voter turnout. And apart from that, so as per the data compiled by the Inter-Parliamentary Union in India, women they make up 14.44% of the Lok Sabha, and a glance at the data in the latest available report of the Election Commission of India shows that women represent only 10.5% of all the members of the parliaments, and that's there. So when talk about the share of representation in MLA, so it is only 9%. So India's ranking in this regard, it has fallen over the last few years. So it is currently behind Pakistan, Bangladesh, and even Nepal. And the representation of Indian women in bureaucracy is also lacking. So women's participation is low enough for the several public services jobs at the center and states to facilitate free applications of women candidates. And despite this, as per the Indian Administrative Services data, the central government's employment census of 2011, less than 11% of its total employees were women. So that's how the case is, and a look at other sectors shows that the situation is no better. So only 20% of MSME owners, they are women, 10% of the startups, they are founded by females, and 23% of the women are in the labor force. So the data is very important. You can cite it at relevant places. And further, the measurement of the female labor force is difficult. So, most of the available statistics on India's female labor rate do not incorporate the unpaid work that females do, and women themselves do not realize that their labor should be classified as work. So, it is here that the question of female literacy, both financial and academic, comes into the picture. So to revive the wetlands in Guwahati, Assam government to recover land from 17 institutions. So flood mitigation plan and artificial floods and real concern. So unlike the rest of the Assam, which gets flooded by the Brahmaputra river during the monsoon, Guwahati gets affected by artificial floods. So according to experts, there's a need to clear the wetlands to manage urban flooding. And with more people migrating to the city, buildings are coming up in the low-lying areas, causing the rainwater to flow onto the roads. So the situation in Bamuk region is very intense, and hundreds of Ukraine, Russia soldiers, they killed over 24 hours in Bamuk battle. So Kyiv claims that 221 pro-Russia troops, they are dead, and over 300 have been wounded. So Ukraine raises calls for evacuation in northeast town under Russia shelling. So illegal arrival of Indians has spiked in 2022 as per UK, and over 400 Indians they have arrived by air last year with inadequate papers. So we have talked about his new stop the boats policy, and so Amitabh Khan sir is there at Idea Exchange. So Amitabh Kant, who worked in the government for 4 decades, is experienced in governance as well as communicating the government's initiatives. From campaigns like Incredible India to Make in India, he is viewed as someone who excels in branding. And in the year of G20, he says that as a G20 Sherpa, he has the onerous task of hosting a successful summit. So the task is challenging due to Russia-Ukraine war that has polarized the world, and trusted by the Prime Minister, he is best placed to explain the government's goals and how it intends to bridge the differences and build consensus amongst all the stakeholders, both domestic and global. So he says that my belief is that these things they need to be informal. We had to discuss bilaterally with China and find a solution. So they were wanting something that we finally managed to put in the communique somewhere else. So we have tried to make G20 not a government's presidency, but a people's presidency. And he's the G20 Sherpa also. So Sherpas, they are like the invoice of the Prime Minister, and they are to take the leader to the top of the Mount Everest, and either you fail to take them or you succeed. So you have to take your leader into confidence. Coming to explain page why ISRO brought a satellite back into the Earth's atmosphere. So how was the satellite brought down? So we're talking about the megatropics. One was launched in 2011. It was recently brought back into the Earth's atmosphere. So although the planned missions life of the satellite was only 3 years, but it continued providing data on water cycle and energy exchanges in the tropics for nearly a decade. And this was for the very first time that the space agency they attempted such a maneuver to clear out the space debris, despite the satellite not being built to do so. So this topic is important from the context of the space debris and the challenges for the future space missions. So why did ISRO attempt the re-entry was that other than the extra fuel conveniently remaining in the satellite, ISRO they attempted the re-entry to demonstrate and understand the process of doing so because there was extra fuel available. And while several nations and the private entities launching satellites mostly in the low Earth orbit, it has become imperative to keep the space clean. So thousands of objects they are flying around in these orbits, and not just the old satellites and their parts, but also last stages of the rockets that took them there are still orbiting as space debris. So they're moving at extremely high speeds. Even the smallest debris can destroy the active satellites. So that is the danger from the space debris. And scarier still is the Kessler syndrome. So this is a scenario where the space debris increases to a point where it just creates more. One collision triggers another others. So this is the Kessler syndrome, that the more the space debris, so basically it would be having more collisions and one would be triggering another collision. And this is the reason that space debris is monitored, and sometimes satellites they have to be moved out of the way. So that was the main reason why we attempted a re-entry of this in the Indian atmosphere. So ISRO it also follows the guidelines of United Nations and the Interagency Space Debris Coordination Committee, which says that satellites they should be deorbited after the mission life, and either it can be through a controlled entry over a safe impact zone as it was done with megatropics, or by bringing it down to reduce the orbital lifetime, so the time it would take for a satellite to drop from a particular orbit by itself to under 25 years. So wheat output and inflation, we have been talking about the cereal inflation, and specifically about wheat, we have explained, we have understood two main reasons behind wheat inflation. So one is the Russia-Ukraine war. The global supply of wheat has been impacted because of that war. Secondly is because of the change in the rainfall patterns domestically. The domestic output has been impacted. So these are the two main reasons, and let's understand what this article is talking about. So in 2021-22, wheat crop failed when commodity prices across the world they were on fire, and this year improved global supplies and low prices they can keep the food inflation in check irrespective of the domestic production. So talking about it, it's a matter of temperature. So recently we've been talking about that this year we would be experiencing extreme heat waves, and that would be impacting the output of food grains. So even that is going to, further accelerate the inflation of wheat prices of food grains. And obviously it is important that Russia-Ukraine war also ends very soon. So that would be also a relief for us. And deficit to surplus. So simply put, the world has overcome, if not shrugged off, the effects of the Ukraine war. And the supply situation has changed from deficit to perhaps surplus in most agricultural commodities. So even like fertilizer supply was also impacted because of this war. So that's reflected in the global prices, including of urea and diammonium phosphate. So this fall from recent peak is quite steep. So all this has implications for food inflation back home. And also a case in point is also mustard. So its prices, they are ruling at around rupees 5,000 per quintal in most mandis, and against their MSP of rupees 5,500 almost. And we can say that the fall in the oilseed trade well above the MSP last year, it has come despite reports of the frost damage to the crop from the severe cold wave conditions in mid-January. So despite that, we are seeing fall in the prices of mustard. So clearly, even if the domestic production, be it of mustard or wheat, it takes a hit, the consequences for the food inflation may not be as bad as last year. And the reason is that the world has more grain and oil than before right now. So situation has eased as of now. So there are basically two major problems remaining with the Silicon Valley Bank. The most immediate problem is the bank's large deposits above the federal government's insurance limit of $250,000. So the uninsured deposits, they can't be accessed right now, and likely they will have to be released in an orderly process. So this is one thing. And Second, there is no buyer of Silicon Valley Bank, and typically the bank regulators, they look for a stronger bank to take on the assets of a failing bank. So is this a sign that we could repeat what happened in 2008? So at the moment, the answer is no, because most banks, they are far more diversified than the Silicon Valley Bank. And the most recent round of stress test by the Federal Reserve of the largest banks and the financial institutions showed that all of them would survive a deep recession and a significant rise in unemployment, if it is the case in coming times also. So right now, we cannot say that the situation as it happened in 2008, as we saw it unfolding, will it going to happen this time or not? So right now it is no, because the major client of the Silicon Valley Bank was startups, so it was more because of that, and obviously tight monetary policy led to this thing. So that's all for today. Thank you for joining Ansarkari, and you'll be also getting the PDF link in the description box. Apart from that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please subscribe to it and hit the like button for this video and share it as much as possible. Thank you so much for joining us.